What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be discussing what would happen if Izuku Midoriya was born with Beast Boy's powers in the MHA world. Now, I've covered Robin and even Raven, so check those out if you're interested. However, with that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, just leave a like if you enjoy the video, seeing as it'll help me out a ton and make my day. But with no further ado, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We start our story off with a phone call. Now, this would be a very important phone call because Inko would actually be on the phone with Hisashi, who's working overseas at the moment, doing a lot of research for the thing that his boss has basically been wanting to do, and he specializes in animals and, basically genealogy, like specialization or whatever. Basically, just something smart that's going to have him create a random serum, right? Now, obviously, after hearing that, you're probably like, okay, that's how he gets the powers. And yes, that is exactly how he gets his powers. Okay, look. So pretty much what's going to happen is Izuku's going to be going to the quirk doctor, and it would be on this particular day that Izuku would be told that he's quirkless. Izuku's heart would immediately break, and he just turns into a different person. That same day, Inko would end up calling Hisashi, and he would be quite bummed about it because honestly he was hoping that Izuku was born with his flame breathing quirk, but apparently it didn't happen. Izuku after this would end up just being sad and disappointed, and ultimately decides that he can just watch some All Might videos to cheer himself up. While he's doing this, his mom would end up creeping through the door and seeing everything that's happening. She ends up just kind of being like, Izuku, like, are you okay? And then, she just breaks down, cries, and we have that iconic scene in the first episode, right? And when Izuku goes to school, he obviously would tell everybody of his quirkless status, and after that happens, the bullying would immediately commence. Izuku remains quirkless until the age of 7 years old, and it would be on this day that Hisashi would have decided to take Izuku with him to America. Or not to America, but a very, very distant area of Japan where, they're working and all that stuff. So that's why Izuku's going to be with his father. It would have been one of those bring your kid to work day, and Izuku would be there with Hisashi. Hisashi would be having a phenomenal day. I mean, he was very tired and he had very dark bags around his eyes. However, he was coming close to a breakthrough, and he was talking about it all day, telling Izuku how close he is, how this is going to revolutionize everything. Like literally medicine is going to go through the roof, and people are going to be able to heal themselves. Like, with animal genealogy, they could change so many people's lives. And Izuku would just be listening to this, being like, yep, yeah, sure, dad. Not really understanding and being like, just agreeing with everything that his dad's saying and just kind of going along with it with a happy smile on his face. Eventually, a bunch of guys with suits would walk in and end up telling Hisashi that his research project and everything that he's worked on will definitely be being canceled now, and everything that he had must be destroyed, saying that it appears that finally their research got out into the public, and it appears that many people don't actually agree with what they're doing, so they're shutting the whole thing down before their corporation gets caught. And, caught with the evidence, you know what I mean? And, Hisashi would be like, I'm close, if you could just give me one more week, I promise I'm so close. This could revolutionize everything. But the higher ups would say, no, you have no more time, Hisashi. And just without thinking, he grabs the serum and he looks at Deku and he just gets down on knee level with him and says that he needs him to do him a favor. And then he just stabs the syringe into Deku's neck and straight plunges this green juice into Izuku's neck. Izuku would fall onto the ground and begin pretty much shaking, and then the people with suits would take out guns immediately, aiming them at Hisashi, saying, "What did you do?" Immediately as this happens, Hisashi puts his hands up and goes to his ground on his knees. Tears begin coming from his eyes as he says, "What did I do?" I think I might have just killed my son. You know what I mean? This stuff wasn't proven. It wasn't researched quite enough. What did I just do? and Izuku's body would begin twitching as they would aim a gun towards the direction of Izuku, and Izuku would end up pretty much transforming into a beast, like a gigantic, like gorilla, yeah, like a just gigantic gorilla, like a super powerful, massive one from like back in the days, right? And Izuku just looks at the direction of the guys with guns, and he immediately would pick bro up, toss him to the wall, and just bro's body just literally just dies upon contact. He then turns around, roars, beats at his chest, and a bullet would come flying at him, which would ricochet off of him, and he would rush in at the man with the suit and just absolutely clobber him. He literally rips his face off, and then turning towards the direction of Hisashi, who's trying to calm Deku down, being like, Izuku, like, please calm down, like, I'm your father, do you recognize me? But Izuku does not care at all about what's going on, and he runs through Hisashi and all of the other guards that would end up arriving, just killing each and every single one and pretty much going haywire. Izuku just destroys so many people on this particular day, and Izuku would be one of Hisashi's worst mistakes, if not the biggest mistake of his life. Because him injecting that serum into his son in that condition, in that environment, was just a terrible idea. Had this have happened behind closed doors and glass that was like bulletproof, then maybe, but it was in a horrible position. Eventually heroes end up arriving to the scene, and once they do, they're finally able to subdue Izuku. However, once the fight would end, they would end up taking Izuku and immediately taking him towards Tartarus, where for years, Deku would just rot away in the prison. He would meet a lot of the inmates, and Izuku's personality would end up shifting towards that of Beast Boy's. Now, is it that because of Izuku's own merit? No. It's because of the fact that Izuku decides that he's not going to just let his status of being a prisoner in Tartarus ruin his life. Like, obviously, Deku wasn't treated like a villain because it was uncontrollable. However, Izuku being there wouldn't be treated that bad, and he wouldn't be around like the most villainous inmates in the world, just more of like the chilled out ones. So Izuku would learn a lot of things about how the outside world was and speech, and he'd be taught a lot of things in prison. He'd be getting very, very tired of prison food, and during his time that he would be in prison, he would not be a vegan because he doesn't know of his ability to transform into animals. However, his green skin would be a permanent thing in Izuku's life, and one day when he's in Tartarus, some random person would come to visit him. Izuku would be called out, and eventually he would make his way towards a separate room where there would be armed guards all over the place. Nezu ends up holding his hand up and saying they're allowed to go, and Izuku would be taken out of his cuffs. Izuku, after this happens, would look at Nezu and ask him what he thinks is stopping him from turning into an animal and ripping him to shreds. And Nezu would say that they both have something in common. They're both animals. As Izuku would sit down and listen to Nezu, and Nezu would pretty much offer him a choice. He can either remain in Tartarus for the rest of his life and do nothing, or he could be living a normal life. He could be training to become a hero, and he could be given a full ride scholarship to UA. Nezu is read up on Izuku's file and his quirk, and it seems very impressive. And from what he's seen, it was an outlash, something that Izuku had absolutely no control over, right? That's what Nezu would ask. And Izuku would say, yeah, that's exactly what happened. My dad injected me with the serum, and here we are now, Tartarus for the last couple years of my life. Izuku would be 12 at this point, and Nezu would say, I see. Well, the offer's up to you. You can choose to call me or not. I'll be expecting a call sometime tomorrow. And Izuku would stop Nezu before he leaves and say, wait, I'll go with you. Please, take me out of this hellhole. And Nezu would look at him, smile, and say, perfect. Well, I'll be waiting for you outside. Go ahead and get your stuff situated, and I'll go ahead and sign all of your release forms. Nezu would then end up taking Izuku towards this huge and massive house where he has a bunch of training facilities, and Nezu would end up telling Izuku that for the next 2 years, he's going to be training with his quirk every single day and facing off against robots, where Izuku just trains day after day after day, and Nezu would create different obstacle courses for Deku to go through, and he would give him different scenarios of villains. He would even make Izuku train in the USJ every now and then, and Izuku would become very familiarized with UA. Every now and then, Nezu would even take Izuku to his office, and he would even set him up in private course with other teachers that could teach him how to catch up to everybody else, considering that everyone's so far ahead of him in terms of like mental, not like IQ, you know what I mean? Because Izuku doesn't really have the schooling to back up his bronze, you know? So eventually Izuku would be taught all of these things by Nezu and a bunch of his connections and people, and using all the money that Nezu has, Izuku would be molded into basically a perfect hero day one of the UA entrance exam. And Nezu would tell him that he could honestly just end up joining UA like if it was just him, because he's given him the scholarship, or he could take the entrance exam test for like a recommendation exam. And Izuku would say, why would I do that? I want to get into UA just like everybody else who has to get into UA, the hard way. Make me take the test, Nezu. I want to do it. And Nezu would look at him in a bit of a weird expression, being like, why would you do that? Like, you're given the option not to have to go through with that tedious task and you still want to do it? He would ultimately end up agreeing, and Izuku would ultimately make his way towards UA on that particular day. Izuku would end up arriving on a chopper, and when he steps out, everybody would immediately look at the color of his skin and judge him. And Izuku would look at them being like, it's probably because I'm different. And everybody would be looking at him, and of course they're judging him because he's green. And because of that, Izuku would make his way inside. Once Izuku's inside, he would end up seeing everybody and realizing how much competition he has to deal with. Izuku would slightly get nervous. However, eventually he would hear a blue-haired boy go up to stand up and then begin questioning Present Mike. Present Mike would immediately roast this kid and burn him, saying that if he would have just paid attention, he would have understood the point of the test and the 0 pointers. He was getting to that. And Ida ultimately sits down and would finally be quiet, you know? But once that ends up happening, Izuku would make his way towards the outside portion after acing the written exam, and ultimately once there, Izuku would begin trying to make his way towards the front before he's suddenly grabbed by the shoulder by a random boy with blue hair. Again, the weirdo who ended up yelling at Present Mike. He would end up telling him that it's not nice to go and interrupt people when they're trying to get psyched up, and Izuku would say he was just going towards the front, with Ida just bowing down, immediately being like, oh, my apologies, I thought you were trying to bother that girl. And Izuku would say, of course not, wouldn't want to mess up her chances, right? And Ida would say, right, before he bows and apologizes again, and Izuku would make his way towards the front, when suddenly he notices Uraraka's very worried expression, and he gives her a quick little speech and pump up talk, you know, to get her really going. Uraraka would finally lose her nervousness, and eventually Present Mike would end up telling everybody that they need to go. There's no countdowns in a real battle. What are they doing? Ultimately, everybody would finally make their way towards the robots, and Izuku would immediately transform into a cheetah, running towards the direction of a robot before transforming into a gigantic T-Rex and just crushing it between his jaws. Following this, Izuku would turn himself into a rhino and rush towards the direction of 3 robots, just kind of like ramming them, before he then turns into a snake of an anaconda and begins slithering up a building, before then ultimately turning into a bird and flying up into the air, getting a perfect bird's eye view of the city, and ultimately noticing that a bunch of robots were all in a certain location towards the back end of the test. Izuku would fly there as fast as possible, and Ida, noticing this, using his engine quirk, would rush over there as well, wanting to see why Izuku's making his way over there, realizing that there's probably a bunch of robots there. But by the time that Ida gets there, Izuku would have already transformed himself into a gigantic whale, the biggest the biggest animal in the world currently, and he just lands on all the robots. It would be like 10 3-pointers, 2 2-pointers, and 7 1-pointers, you know what I mean? And Izuku just gets a grand total of like 176 robot points before finally the ground would begin rumbling, and Izuku would realize that it's about time the 0-pointer came out. Looking around, he wants to see if anybody's willing to take that thing on, considering that the first time he had to face that thing off, he was extremely scared. But after having practiced against robots for so long, Izuku could take this thing out no problem because he knows the ins and outs of it and has fought it multiple times. Izuku, once seeing this, would begin rushing over there, and upon doing so, he realizes he can hear a girl begging for help, but everybody's just leaving her. Izuku immediately rushes over towards Uraraka, wanting to help her as soon as possible, throwing rubble off of her before asking her if she's okay, and she'd be like, "Look out!" pushing Izuku out of the way as, the zero pointer was about to stomp on her. However, Izuku was not about to have any of this, and Izuku would pretty much turn into a gigantic pterodactyl, right? As he flies in, grabs Uraraka and flies her on top of a building. Uraraka would look up to see Izuku as a gigantic bird in the not bird but dinosaur, and then Izuku would proceed to transform himself into a massive dinosaur, right? Like a T-Rex. Obviously, it's nothing compared to the zero pointer. However, Izuku would ram the zero pointer, and the zero pointer would end up trying to punch at Izuku. Izuku from here would turn into a small hummingbird, and he flies towards the compartment of where the electronic section of the zero pointer would be at. Izuku would immediately turn himself into the smallest animal he can think of. I don't even know what that would be. But then ultimately making his way towards the circuitry, Izuku would turn himself into a hippo and just munch on the cables and ultimately cause a zero pointer to malfunction and just fall over, toppling over. If you guys thought Izuku was just gonna manhandle the zero pointer, y'all are crazy. Like stay in realism, boys. Even though he has the ability to transform into animals, we're not gonna be doing all that. At least not quite yet. But ultimately what would pretty much end up happening after that is that Izuku would make his way home and Nezu would be there waiting for him, clicking a flashlight saying, "I've been expecting you," as he sips tea, and Izuku would say that's the 16th time he's done that. And Nezu would laugh before saying, "Yeah, yes, but it's very funny seeing your reaction," before Izuku would say, "Whatever, look, I did the test, I think I passed, right?" And Nezu would say, "Oh, you passed from the moment I picked you up from that facility at Tartarus." And Izuku would roll his eyes before suddenly he asked Nezu, what the first day of school is going to be all about. And Nezu would say that that's for his teacher Aizawa to decide. Before suddenly we have a time skip and Izuku's just walking through just like a normal day. Nothing could be going wrong until ultimately he sees a billboard that says, "Like the video." And then after that, he continues walking, right? Once he does that, Izuku ultimately would finally make his way towards school, and upon seeing the door, he immediately walks in, not being too impressed considering he's been around the school for years now. 2 years, obviously. But ultimately, once he walks in, he would immediately be greeted to the side of a blonde-haired boy and Ida both arguing about who knows what. Izuku would make his way towards the back, staying quiet, but one specific girl would catch his attention immediately. And that girl would be Mina Ashido. Why her? Because of the fact that she has a different colored skin as well, and Izuku thinks it's interesting the way she looks. Ultimately, Izuku immediately focuses in on Aizawa, and once realizing that he's passed out, Izuku would remain in the back silent, just waiting for Aizawa to wake up. Eventually he does so, and he would tell everybody to get these things on and meet him outside, and eventually everybody would do so after some questioning from Uraraka about, what about orientation? But once that would finally be sorted out, he would end up tossing the ball towards Izuku, who would be told to throw it, considering he was the one who got the highest scores on the quirk assessment during the UA entrance exam. And Izuku would smile before then transforming into the strongest animal that he has, which would probably be like an extinct Sasquatch, like a gigantic Sasquatch, and then he would throw the ball many meters away. I don't know exactly what it would be, but it's a high score. Eventually everybody would get very excited at this, and people would be like, "Whoa, you can transform into animals?" Izuku would be getting a lot of praise from his classmates, and he would even blush a bit, but eventually all of the other tests would finally be conducted, such as push-ups, sit-ups, 50-meter run, and on those kinds of events, Izuku would just transform into different animals. The grip shrink test, forget about it. Deku transforms into a gorilla and just smashes it to pieces. The side-to-side jumps, Deku transforms into a kangaroo. The 50-meter dash, Deku immediately would turn into a cheetah and just run right by it, getting a very admirable score. And after that happens, Izuku just would have the biggest smile on his face, and he knows he did great. Eventually, when everything would finally be said and done, Izuku would be first place, and Izuku would be paying a lot of attention to Mina Ashido during that entire test. He would have been eyeing her a couple times here and there, and she definitely noticed. She would think to herself she's lucky she got the other kid who seems to have so much potential as well. Ultimately though, after that would end up happening, school would finally let out, and eventually 2 days of worthless classes would go down until eventually they make their way towards their hero course, where All Might would bust through the door and would be like, "I am here," before everybody would immediately begin getting super excited. And eventually after that would end up going down, All Might would end up explaining to everybody that, they're all going to be needing to change into their hero outfits. Why, they may ask? Well, it's because the clothes make the pros, he would say, before then suddenly all of them would make their way outside wearing their dope costumes, and the My Hero theme song would end up playing, as all of them would look awesome, except for Todoroki, and eventually he would tell them about the fact that they're going to be doing the Heroes versus Villains event. Everybody would be like, "What's that?" And All Might would say, "You know what? I'm glad you asked." Going on to explain that it's going to be a 2v2 battle where some people are going to be playing heroes, some villains, and eventually the luck of the draw would finally happen. Izuku's teammate, luck would have it, is Mina Ashido. And who's he going to be going up against? Well, that's none other than Ida and Katsuki Bakugo. As soon as this would be announced, Izuku would immediately turn towards the direction of his teammate, and she would look at him with a big old smile, asking him, "So what's the plan?" And Izuku would look at her and say, "I don't know, but looks like we're gonna be villains." And she'd say, "Hey, cheer up. It's only an act, right?" Izuku would look at her and say, "Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think I'd be great at playing a villain." And Mina goes, "Trust me, we'll be great at playing villains." As from here, both of them would make their way towards the bomb room, and yes, they're gonna be villains. And then Bakugo and Ida, shocking, would be the ones who are heroes. Now, Ida, I get it. But Bakugo? Come on. OG Bakugo was definitely not a hero. Yes, he had a powerful quirk, and yes, he could save lives, but his personality, man, it's just night and day. It did not belong anywhere near a hero side profile, right? But no, what would pretty much end up going down is that we would find ourselves in the UA building, and eventually Izuku would be talking to Mina, asking her, "Okay, what's the game plan?" Izuku would say that he probably thinks that they're just going to pretty much go through every single one of the rooms, and eventually, seeing as there's a time limit, they just have to wait them out. He says that they're probably eventually going to get there, so Izuku says that he's going to transform into an animal, stall them, and he would ask her all about her quirk. She then begins to explain how her quirk is acid and how everything about it works, and Izuku, after getting some understanding, would end up being like, "Okay, look, how about this? Shoot all your acid all over the ground nearby the thing, because I know Ida's quirk is super speed, and maybe that can make him like slip or something." And she's like, "Good idea." And then she does so, and she basically just drops a bunch of bananas, pretty much is the equivalent of what happens. And ultimately, eventually, after some time would pass and explosions would be heard all over the place, finally a massive explosion would come in and cave in the door, and Bakugo would say, "We're here, now give that bomb over." And seeing as, Bakugo doesn't have the same relationship he had with Deku and Canon, they don't really know each other. They don't have that faded rivalry that they have in the original that we would get, right? So instead of that usual Deku scene happening, we basically just get a more chilled out Bakugo who still does want to win and show that he's the best, right? So Bakugo would go in guns blazing, trying to assert his dominance off rip, and Izuku would immediately transform himself into a rhino, rushing in at the direction of Bakugo, as Bakugo would say, "Seriously?" jumping out of the way using an explosion, before Izuku would transform into an anaconda midway and wrap himself around Bakugo. Bakugo from here would be like, "You let me go," as he shoots explosions, and it would actually damage Izuku pretty heavily, right? He would finally get thrown off of him, and eventually Izuku would say, "All right, you want to play rough? We can play that game." He would bang his chest with his fist, normal, and then immediately he just shifts out of his normal clothes and just begins rushing in at Bakugo. Bakugo, seeing this gigantic gorilla rushing in at him, would get a smirk on his face, as using his explosions, he would shoot a full-powered explosion at Deku's face, and Deku would just tank that shit before socking Bakugo in the face and sending him crashing into a wall. Ida, as this is all happening, would have done exactly what they predicted he would have done and would blitz his way towards the bomb. However, he wasn't expecting to slip and fall, straight hit his head and get knocked out. And so it basically just becomes a 1v2. However, Mina jumps in the way, and as Bakugo's trying to recover from getting slammed into the wall, she would shoot a bunch of acid at Bakugo, which would actually burn him, I'm not gonna lie. And Bakugo would have like second-degree burn marks on his face from the acid. Eventually, after getting angry, Bakugo pulls the pin and aims it at Deku, and Mina would be watching as she's like, watch out! But Deku would pretty much just proceed to turn around and hold his hands up as, you know, Mina just watches as Deku's entire like self would just get blown out of the building. Like, bro literally proceeds to get like blown through the wall and onto the floor. He completely gets absolutely knocked out. And Mina would look at Bakugo and look out the window and be like, you took it too far. What were you thinking? And then Bakugo's like, huh, weaklings. He couldn't take it because he didn't transform into a tougher animal. Maybe if he did that, he'd be fine. And from there, we would hear All Might be like, Bakugo, you need to stop now, report to the office. And Bakugo would immediately do so, grumbling and just being like, whatever. Just like actually, like this time around, he actually kind of feels bad for what he did. Like he didn't mean to take it that far, but what happened. And Bakugo's like not really an apologetic guy, so he's not gonna go over towards Izuku and be like, sorry about that, you know what I mean? So yeah, instead Bakugo just goes to the office and would be told that what he did was terrible, and if he does it again, he's 100% getting expelled. From here, what would end up going down is that Izuku would end up getting treated by Recovery Girl, and the following day, when Deku would watch the footage of how everything went down, Nezu would tell Izuku that this is a good thing. And Izuku would be like, how's this a good thing? The dude practically almost killed me yesterday. And Nezu would say, exactly. Now, was that allowed? No. And is he going to get punished for that? Yes. However, Izuku, you're missing the big picture. Instead of treating this as a failed exercise, we should treat it as a positive one. See, Katsuki Bakugo, while he may have injured you pretty heavily, he has taught you a very valuable lesson about villains. You shouldn't about villains. See, even though you were the villain in this case, he acted more like a villain than you ever were in this portion. So if we go under the assumption that you were a hero trying to protect people, think about how far villains are willing to go. He's a hero, and even with that knowledge, he was able to use an attack that powerful just trying to actually hurt you. Villains in the real world, they're not going to be thinking to themselves, oh, I should hold back. They're 100% going to be trying to go for the kill every time. And what Bakugo has taught you this time is not to let your guard down and to finish the job quickly. Am I right, Izuku? Izuku looks at the direction of Nezu and would be like, I guess you got a point. I mean, even though he did it in a horrible way, I guess he sort of did teach me a lesson. And Nezu would just look at him and say, perfect. Well, it looks like you've learned your lesson for the day today. Report back to UA in about 2 days when you're finally done with your injuries. And Deku would be like, sure. As from here, he would miss the next 2 days worth of school. And honestly, that other day was just gratuity because Deku was fine. However, he wanted to take it off and just relax and play video games and stuff. I mean, bro, a new game just came out and Deku was trying to get on all night with the boys. You know, of course, gotta respect the hustle. But once Izuku would finally return, everybody would have these permission slips passed out to them by Aizawa, and following that, everybody would pretty much just be told about what's going to be happening after this, right? And pretty much all that happens is that they're told about how, oh, you know, you guys have to get these permission slips signed, the USJ, yada, yada, yada. In the midst of all this, for the following 3 days, one very little incident would happen that I might have to cover, right? And that's pretty much just the incident where Ida's picked this class president. The moment where he stands up and he's like, calm down, we're UA yeah, that happens. But skipping all of that, we're gonna go straight into the USJ, considering that that's really the only important plus cool part of this whole thing. So pretty much what ends up going down following this is that Izuku and the rest of everybody else would all be in the bus, right? They're all chilling, they're talking amongst themselves, and Tsuyu would be talking about who the strongest is. Eventually, she would say that it either has to be Bakugo or Todoroki. She'd say that Izuku's probably up on that list as well had Bakugo not played dirty. However, she says that villains are going to play dirty all the time, so maybe Izuku shouldn't be on the top of that list. And when Izuku hears that, he kind of just grits his teeth and would look at Bakugo with this look of, bro, I'm gonna get you back. And Bakugo would give him a smirk and he would just look away before finally they end up arriving, and eventually 13 would end up greeting them and just telling them all about how dangerous their quirks are and how they need to use them properly and yada yada yada. Eventually, once they would finish all of this, they would eventually make their way inside of the USJ, and inside of there would be when finally the villains would decide to strike. Kurogiri would finally make his presence known, and he would eventually start everything off by saying, "Sorry for interrupting, heroes, but it looks like we weren't invited," before portals everywhere would begin opening and people would begin realizing that there is a bunch of villains in there. Immediately after this, Izuku would transform into an animal. However, he immediately gets tossed into the ocean, or so he would think. Before opening his eyes, he sees a bunch of villains around him, but immediately Izuku would turn himself into a gigantic octopus-like kraken creature, and he would immediately grab onto the villains as he just begins shaking them underwater violently. He then turns into a shark and would rush in at them as he begins to pretty much chomp on them, and not like eat them, but like he like half chews them, like he leaves them pretty gnarly like shark bites, right? And then he turns into like a giant jellyfish and he would begin shocking these villains. Like he pretty much begins to single-handedly straight destroy these villains underwater. Like, yeah, they have underwater quirks, but they were not expecting anybody like him to be there. Suyu, who would finally have ended up saving Mineta and would watch Izuku just transform from different animal to animal, would be completely shocked. Eventually, Izuku would transform into a gigantic whale and he would say, "Hop on," and then they would do so. Once hopping on, Deku would swim all the way back to shore, where Izuku would notice that Aizawa was having a bit of a hard time, and Izuku would immediately transform into a hawk before he immediately begins flying towards his direction. Picking up one of the villains, he flies them as high as they could go, and then he would drop them on top of another villain who was about to actually use an electricity quirk on Aizawa. Aizawa, being saved by Izuku, would look up into the sky as he realizes that Izuku was falling down at a very rapid pace. He had transformed into a rhino, and Izuku would fall on another villain before then using his horn to pretty much just bash a bunch of different villains away, and eventually Izuku would transform into a tiger before he then lunges at another one and claws at them, knocking them out completely, and Aizawa and Deku would both get back to back as Deku would turn back into his human-like state, and Aizawa would say, "What are you doing here, kid? You're not supposed to be here." And Izuku would say, "I'm just doing what I have to do, Aizawa. Not like anybody else is gonna do my job for me, right?" And then Izuku just looks towards Aizawa, smirks, and Aizawa says, "Duck," as a villain would have actually shot a quirk at them, and then Aizawa, using his scarf, would like deflect it midair, and then eventually he would shoot his scarf at the villain before knocking him out clean, slamming his knee into the villain's head, before then suddenly Shigaraki from the sidelines would begin scratching his neck violently. Bro's fiending. And then ultimately what would end up going down is he'd be like, "Kurogiri, Nomu, now," as the Nomu would finally end up getting summoned in the way. And after all of this would finally go down, Shigaraki would say, "Nomu, kill that brat," as the Nomu would immediately rush in at the direction of Izuku, and Izuku would have to turn himself into a hummingbird to try to avoid all the punches that the Nomu would be throwing at him. The Nomu would throw a punch, and Deku would fly out of the way, just barely missing it, and then the Nomu throws punch after punch after punch. And Izuku, like, he's barely dodging this, might I add, only because of his small size and the fact that hummingbirds are very, very fast creatures. So eventually Izuku would turn himself into a snake and wrap himself around the Nomu. However, the Nomu quite literally tosses him off like he's a ragdoll, and like literally there was nothing there. And Izuku would then get thrown far, far away before he then looks at the direction of the Nomu and sees that the Nomu would have rushed in at Aizawa and punched him down, right? Literally shattering his arm, as Izuku would transform into a T-Rex, roar, like, you know what I mean? And then immediately just rush in at the direction of the Nomu and like bite, like he literally just chomps him, right? But the Nomu's legs and like arms would fall off, and then the Nomu in Izuku's mouth would begin regenerating before he then rips Izuku's mouth open and straight punches Izuku in the, like, the Nomu punched a dinosaur in the face, bro. Like, think about that. And Izuku would get sent flying back before then suddenly a voice would be heard in the background. "Ha ha ha ha, don't fear, because I am here. All Might finally making his presence known, he would immediately jump into the battlefield, and immediately the battle between All Might and the Nomu goes down just like it would in the original. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you guys were like, oh, Izuku's probably gonna stomp the Nomu, yada yada yada. But honestly, no, I don't think he will. I mean, Izuku has the capabilities of turning into animals. That's OP, that's cool and all, but when you really think about how powerful the Nomu is in the My Hero Academia universe and how All Might has the power to change the weather with a punch, I mean, like, Beast Boy has been shown to be taken out by people like Robin. Beast Boy has been shown to be taken out by a lot of characters. And I'm not referencing comic Beast Boy because of course the comics always make the characters more OP, but I'm doing the Beast Boy from the original Teen Titans, right? Like the TEENTITANS Teen Titans. Let's go. You know what I mean? Like the original one, the one where he falls in love with Terra and all that stuff. So that's the one that I'm covering. And that's why this Beast Boy might not be as strong as you guys are like, oh, he's a lot stronger than that. But no, yeah, that's pretty much the only reason why things are like that. But continuing on with the story and without wasting any more of you guys' time, what pretty much ends up going down after that is they have a little cleanup situation where they all pretty much end up being taken home and they're all told that they're not going to be going to school for about a week. Eventually that week happens. UA Press would end up pretty much telling everybody what happened. The situation would dive down a little bit and they would finally all find themselves in UA, right? They're all inside and it would be on this day that they're told about the festival. Just like in the original, Uraraka begins to go absolutely nuts at the thought of, being able to prove herself, get internships, and show her parents that, they made the right choice in putting like the little money that they had and working as hard as they are to pretty much give Uraraka the chance to even become a hero, you know what I mean? And that's why she's excited. But Izuku kind of just wants to be a hero because Nezu told him to. I mean, Izuku hasn't talked to his real mother because he feels bad about the fact that he did kind of, put his dad on a t-shirt. Was it intentional? No, but it still happened, right? And what pretty much ends up going down is that Izuku would finally like realize like, oh wow, like the whole world is gonna watch me. Like, what if my mom is watching this? You know what I mean? Like he's not sure if she's still alive or not, but he's like, what if she is? You know what I mean? And so he asks Nezu this, and he talks to Nezu, and he's like, Nezu, I don't know like how I feel about participating in the sports festival. And Nezu would be like, what are you talking about, child? You have to participate in the sports festival. It's part of UA's course. And Izuku would say that he knows that, but he just doesn't know how he would feel knowing that his mom might be watching. I mean, he was responsible for his own father's death, and he hasn't seen her since the day that she visited the first time that Izuku was incarcerated, and that she only visited him once, and the expression on her face was just so sad. Izuku looks at Nezu and would say that he doesn't know how he'd be able to cope with that. And Nezu says not to worry, that his mom is alive and that she, even if she does watch him, what's she gonna do? It's not like she has care over Izuku. Nezu would say that she actually was the one who gave full custody to him over towards Nezu, that she wanted nothing to do with Izuku. And Nezu would say, why not, instead of thinking of this as a way for her to think and judge you, instead think of this as a way to show her what her loss looks like. Show her that if she had just understood you and taken care of you and led you the right way, then maybe you could have been a hero and she could have been in your corner. But this time you get the chance to show her what it's like to not be in your corner. Make her regret that decision, Izuku. Think about it that way. And Izuku, after listening to that, would be like, you know what, Nezu? You're right. I didn't think about it that way, but now that you say it, honestly, I'm kind of pumped. As from here, eventually the day would come and Izuku would make his way towards the podium, having been the one to have gotten the most robot points in the entrance exam. And when he would walk up, he would like take a couple deep breaths before like being shy at first and like tapping the mic, and then taking just one more deep breath. And then bro goes full extrovert and all, be like, are you ready? And then the crowd would be like it's silent at first, But Izuku would be like, come on, what is this? Like, it sounds to me like you guys read he would say like a random person name's concert, and then they would laugh, and then they'd be like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like they finally get excited, and then eventually Izuku just gives a really heartfelt like excitement moment. He makes everybody feel good about themselves. He tells everybody to try their best, and he pretty much ends the speech by saying plus ultra, right? Eventually though, after that happens, Midnight would take the microphone and say that he got them pretty riled up. So without any further ado, the race. As from here, they would all make their way towards the starting positions, and eventually Midnight would shoot the starting pistol, letting them all immediately start, and Izuku would immediately transform into a hawk, flying towards the direction of the finish line, making as many cuts and corners as he can, and pretty much just flying his way towards the direction of the finish line. Bakugo, who also was using his flight via his explosions, would be making his way there, and Todoroki using his ice and freezing the robots would be neck and neck, and all three of them would be racing for first place. They're all trying their absolute hardest, and after passing the 0-pointer portion, there would really be nothing stopping them other than their stamina. So it's pretty much just a test of stamina. However, Izuku, because of the fact that he's straight up an actual bird, like the creature that he transformed into is literally made to fly, I'm going to be giving the slight edge to Izuku and saying that because of that reason, Izuku does end up winning. Not by a lot, but he definitely does end up winning by a significant amount, right? Like a decent amount, like a good chunk. And after that happens, Izuku would be given the 10 million point headband, right? And he'd immediately be like, yeah, before suddenly he realizes what that means. And everybody, just like in that moment when Izuku realized that everybody turned against him, he would have that same realization of, oh wow, like no way did I just do this to myself. But he looks around and he just sees that everybody's looking at him, and they're all looking at him with this expression of like, you're going down, you know what I mean? Izuku at first would get nervous, but then he would think about how hard his last couple years were and how he's had to deal with that stare for so many years in Tartarus that it doesn't even faze him anymore. Izuku would simply say, come on then, I'll take you all on. As they would all look at him, then like surprisingly, some of them would look away, and then Izuku would chuckle, before then suddenly somebody comes up to him and would be like, hey, can I join your team? And Izuku would turn, see Mina, and he'd be like, sure, you're welcome to join my team. As from here, two more individuals would walk up and say, let us join. Immediately jumping back into what we ended up leaving off on, the two individuals would finally show themselves, and it would be none other than Tokiyami and Mei Hatsume. Mei because she obviously wants to get some clout off of Izuku, and Tokiyami because he's just a great individual. The match would start, and immediately what would end up going down is that Izuku would find himself against a wall immediately. Every single team would be gunning for him, and he'd win. I really don't like covering the cavalry battle, okay guys? Just know Izuku wins and everybody else who wins in the original wins, okay? But continuing on with the story, Izuku's first match would actually be against Shinso. And if I'm being completely honest, all of Deku's training could have never prepared him for the unknowing of Shinso's abilities. Just like in the original, Ojiro would still warn Izuku. However, if we're all being honest with ourselves, I'm pretty sure we all know that Izuku would still fall victim to the trap that is Shinso's mind control. So as soon as this would happen, Izuku losing all access to his own consciousness, there's either two ways that this can go. Number one, Izuku gets humbled and his body pretty much just does exactly what Shinso says. Number two, Izuku not having access to his own body would end up transforming into an animal and going completely crazy like he did long ago. However, honestly, I would much rather humble Izuku and give him this experience of, oh wow, I can actually lose, than to just give him a different route or anything else, you know what I mean? So instead we're going to be going with the humbling experience, and so the UA School Sports Festival would pretty much just go on to be dominated by Katsuki Bakugo. Following this, we end up finally cutting over back to the class, and Nezu would have actually gave Izuku a pretty good talking to about his L. He ends up telling Izuku that while he may be strong and his quirk may be very powerful, there may come some days where some people will be blatantly more powerful than him. There will come some days where some villains will be more cunning than him. There will be some days where villains will have quirks that he's completely not ready for, and Izuku's job as a pro hero is to combat those things. He needs to be ready for for everything and anything that could possibly come his way, and Izuku's training all of these years has prepared him for the bare minimum. Now, it's Izuku's job to learn more at UA and become the best hero he can be. Izuku, after hearing that, would nod, tell Nezu that he's happy and that he's glad that he's been raised by such an amazing guy. Nezu would be like, I've only done what I could, young Midoriya, but I understand what you mean. Ultimately, after this, Izuku would end up finding himself in the classroom after the talking to with Nezu, and eventually Midnight would be the one inside. She immediately goes on to tell everybody that they need to pick their hero names, and they would immediately all do so. Everybody would pick the same names as in the original, and what would end up going down after this is they end up picking their internship opportunities. Because of this, what pretty much would end up happening is that All Might would kind of sort of end up going over towards the direction of Izuku. Remember guys, I never ended up talking about who would inherit the ability of One for All. But after Nezu ended up putting in a good word for Izuku and All Might has seen Izuku in action, the way that he carries himself as a hero and all the things that he's been capable of doing thus far, All Might thinks that Izuku is actually quite a very capable user for One for All. All Might would end up actually pulling Izuku to the side and talking to him about it, and Izuku would do what any of us would do. He accepts. Following this, All Might would tell him to go intern with Gran Torino, and Izuku would accept. After inheriting One for All, he makes his way towards Gran Torino, and in the original, we would see Izuku struggle a lot with controlling full cowling and all that stuff. However, this time, Izuku's actually had access to powers, not quite like One for All. However, I think that the fact that he's going to be with Gran Torino a lot sooner, the fact that he understands One for All, the fact that Izuku doesn't view One for All as the biggest thing in the world, would lead Izuku to getting access to a full-on 15% full cowling the first day that he would use it with Gran Torino. The training would finally be put to use when Izuku would end up having to go face to face with the hero killer Stain. And let's just say that Izuku would absolutely wipe the floor with him. I mean, it's a complete abomination how badly Izuku would genuinely end up destroying. And when I say destroying, don't take it lightly, ladies and gentlemen. I'm being so serious. He destroys, in every aspect and way, Stain. Using the ability of full 15% cowling, you can keep up with him physically. Now imagine a 15% cowling, gigantic dinosaur. Bro, that's not okay. Stain literally gets one tap by Izuku's tail. And then afterwards, Izuku grabs Ida and Native as a gigantic hawk, a dinosaur, a gigantic pterodactyl, a pterodactyl, No, it was a giant pterodactyl, and Izuku would go on to take them immediately towards a hospital. Mid-air, Stain would jump on top of Izuku and be like, I'm not finished. And Izuku would immediately drop Ida and Native on a nearby building as he could immediately transform into a giant gorilla and ape and slam his fist down onto Stain, completely destroying his ribs. As Stain would have to get rushed to the hospital, and after this would happen, a Nomu would come flying in out of nowhere. Izuku transforms into a T-Rex and just eats the Nomu mid-flight. And after all this would end up going down, Izuku would go viral on the news. Nezu would end up saying that he wishes he could have covered this situation up, but unfortunately he couldn't. And after all this would finally happen, they returned to school to take the final exams. They would all take the written exam pretty easily, and once we get to the final physical portion, Izuku and Bakugo, seeing as they both don't have a decent the best relationship in the world, would both be the ones that are pitted up against him, just like in canon. Bakugo, being the person that he is would still decide to rush in first and go full on guns blazing at All Might, and unfortunately that doesn't work. However, luckily he has a gigantic saber-toothed tiger with 15% full cowling flowing through it that would come in and smack All Might through a building, rushing at him again before transforming into a little armadillo, which would proceed to roll around the floor and catch All Might off guard. Bro suddenly transforms into a skunk and straight shits in All Might's face, Naruto style, when he defeated Kiba, and let's just say that a 15% cowling fart in your face is terrible. All Might would immediately fall to the ground and be like, disgusting. Bro proceeds to throw up, and Izuku would use his cheetah transformation with 15% cowling, 15, and would blitz the gate. They would immediately win, and after that ends up going down, we would find ourselves in the Forest Training Camp arc. Now, the Forest Training Camp arc is a very interesting thing. Not really. The only interesting thing that happens would definitely be the villain attack. Now that is interesting. And just like in the original, Izuku would still end up finding out all the same things that he would have about Koda, just like in canon, which ultimately leads him to being like, hey Koda, like, can I talk to you? Koda would be a little prick about it and would be like, get away from here. And Izuku would just leave the plate of curry there, staying very nearby, just listening to Koda cry until ultimately some random villain would end up arriving. Obviously, it's Muscular, and the second that Izuku sees Muscular, he'd be like, what in the world? Like, he comes in, and Muscular would have tried to kill the Koda, but Izuku 15% Cowling would be able to push himself to 20, blitz in, grab Koda, and barely save him, with Muscular revealing who he is, and Koda practically pissing himself at the thought of dying to the same person his own parents did. He would immediately cry and say, that's the guy who killed, and Izuku doesn't even need no more. He knows exactly what Koda's trying to say. Izuku puts Koda down and looks at him in his eyes, getting to eye level with him and saying, don't worry, kid. I got this. Go back to Aizawa, and if I don't make it back, then I lost. But if I do, then we'll have a party about it, alright? Koda would look at him, nod, and run away. And Izuku would proceed to transform into a gigantic gorilla, like with 15% full Cowling in him, and slam at his chest, being like, looking at him and saying, you want this? And immediately, Muscular would transform into a gigantic muscular state and say, let's get down to business. They rush in at each other and bam, their fists would collide. However, Izuku's would overpower Muscular's, and Muscular would be like, what the? Because a gorilla is nothing but basically pure muscle, and Izuku is channeling 15% full Cowling, I wholeheartedly believe Izuku would be able to destroy Muscular. And using these abilities, Izuku would do just that, straight slamming Muscular on the cliffside and ultimately making his way towards his classmates, where the same thing that happened in the original, considering Bakugo and Tokiyami getting kidnapped and then Izuku coming in and saving them. However, one change, a very, very big change might I add, would basically just be that Izuku this time wouldn't have damage to himself, so Toga wouldn't fall in love with him, and this time when Izuku gets thrown to go try to save Tokiyami and Bakugo, Izuku would actually be able to save both of them, jumping in through the portal with both of them at the same time, and now Bakugo, Tokiyami, and Izuku would be looking at the villains who are all just bloodlusted, ready to take him on. Shigaraki would say, well, if it isn't Izuku Midoriya, you've caused quite the trouble for me. And you know what? I hate trouble. As from here, Dabi would shoot flames at the direction of Izuku, and Tokiyami would cover them with Dark Shadow, who would immediately retreat due to the fact that flames are his only weakness. Izuku would immediately transform into a gigantic rhino and rush in at Dabi, who would shoot flames at him, and Deku would get heavily damaged. However, he would be able to pierce Dabi and be able to send him flying through the wall. Bakugo would slam an explosion on Shigaraki's face, sending him flying back, and Tokiyami would immediately grab on a Toga and slam her away using Dark Shadow. From here, Izuku would realize that the darkness is what Tokiyami needs. So he would lean towards Bakugo and say, Bakugo, take out all the lights. And Bakugo would say, don't tell me what to do, nerd. As from here, he would do what Izuku said, and Tokiyami, using his Dark Shadow ability, would destroy everybody present. All for One ends up arriving through a black portal, and he would say, well, if it isn't the heroes, then Izuku Midoriya. You know, I was hoping that I could meet you someday. Your quirk, truly extraordinary. Now, I'm going to be taking this, as he would immediately use a light quirk, and he would shoot so much light that Tokiyami's Dark Shadow just couldn't stay out, right? And ultimately, he walks towards the direction of Tokiyami, and Izuku would try to attack him, but All For One would put up a barrier, and then he would grab on Tokiyami's face as he sucks Dark Shadow in. And at this moment, the pro heroes like All Might and stuff, who are not at the Forest Training Camp, mind you, would be rushing in as fast as he can. Endeavor, Best Genius, all that. They're making their way there as much as they possibly can. And when they end up arriving, they end up seeing a scene of Tokiyami with being held up by the throat, about to get killed by All For One, mind you, and Bakugo shooting in, trying to explode All For One, as All For One would send him flying back, and Deku would finally smash at the barrier, destroying it, as All Might comes in and barely saves Tokiyami. Immediately after this, All Might turns towards Izuku and says, "I got it, kid." And it would be at this moment that he would face off against All For One. However, this time around, All Might would have been tired because he was doing hero work that same day, so this time around the battle would not go like you guys were expecting. All Might would inevitably lose his life this day after the Shigaraki reveal would finally be unveiled to All Might. And when Izuku sees All Might's limp and lifeless body on the floor, it would be as if time itself stopped. Super Saiyan transformation time type stuff, right? And Izuku's heart would just start beating. Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. And Izuku would finally transform into a gigantic dragon, a mythical beast, a mythical animal. Ain't no more time for this weak stuff now. Izuku's on serious stuff now. And Izuku would immediately blitz in at All For One at speeds that All For One wasn't expecting for such a massive creature. Straight slashing All For One in half with his massive claws and 100% full cowling flowing through it. All Might's body would hit the floor and Endeavor, Best Genius, and them would watch. They then turn towards Izuku, and Izuku at this moment would be losing control, but internally, he's trying to fight it back. Endeavor and Best Genius try to hold Izuku off, Endeavor shooting flames and Best Genius using his strings to the best of his capability. Eventually, they're able to hold him back just long enough, however, they do get battle damage because Izuku's going haywire, and Izuku would ultimately end up being the one responsible for heavy damage that would end up happening just like in canon. However, he would finally be restrained, and once he would wake up, he would be in restraints. Nezu would be there, and he would ask him how he feels. Izuku would say he feels fine, but where's All Might? He would say immediately. Nezu would say his funeral was held about a week ago, and Izuku would say, how long have I been out? Nezu would say, a while. But to cut to the chase, since you are, tied to All Might now forever and always, you're going to need to act like him. No more losing control, Izuku. The time for you to not be able to control your power is far beyond us, and it seems to us that it may have had some sort of evolution. Potentially, the quirk of One For All may have had something to do with it. We both know now at this current moment that your original powers, your beast abilities, are definitely not linked to a quirk. However, they are definitely linked to something else deep within your genealogy, and that's something that we're definitely going to be needing to find out more about. However, for now, I say that what we're going to be doing is pretty much putting you on a training regimen and trying to fix these details out. 2 weeks would pass. Not only that, but the provisional hero license thing would pass, and eventually Izuku would get a very, very good hold on his brand new abilities of turning into mythical beasts. Now he can turn into things like Megalodon, he can turn into dragons, he can turn into Griffiths, he can basically turn into like alien things that he can imagine. And Izuku has access to so many different beasts that it's just insane how powerful he got. Imagine Beast Boy with One For All, like bro, how busted is that? Like, not even the mythical creatures, bro. Just imagine a 100% gorilla tank blitzing you. Like, bro, that sounds terrifying. Like, seriously, it sounds horrifying. Like, it's not cool. Izuku has the ability to transform into like this albino gigantic white like beast that is just insanely powerful. And Izuku has access to so many different abilities, even wolf creatures like werewolves and stuff like that. Izuku has access to so many things. Like I couldn't possibly explain them all. Eventually, though, we would finally get to the day when the big three would arrive to the classroom and they would end up doing their own introductions, telling the class that they're not exactly up to pro hero level yet, however, they will be someday. And ultimately, Mirio ends up challenging the entire class to a fight. The whole class would actually get mollywopped, including Todoroki and Katsuki Bakugo. However, when Mirio gets to Izuku, Izuku, using his abilities of One For All and his beast transformations, would be able to get the upper hand on Mirio and ultimately take him out in one fell swoop. Mirio would be completely shocked at the power displayed by Izuku Midoriya. And by the way, before I continue the story, if you guys hear my dog barking in the background, my apologies, but she's going crazy right now. Anyways though, continuing on with the story, finally Izuku would get an offer from Mirio to intern with Sir Night-Eye. And Izuku, knowing that Sir Night-Eye was actually linked with All Might so long ago, Izuku would accept. Immediately once Izuku ends up arriving, Sir Night-Eye would tell Izuku that he knows he's the successor. Not only does he know he's the successor, but he also needs to ask him some questions. Before, he saw a vision of All Might dying. However, he was never intended to die there. What's it called? Sir Night-Eye would immediately drop a bombshell on Deku and say that he was supposed to die in 3 more years, but it appears like things were sped up. I'm not sure why, but it seems that you had something to do with it. If you have any shame, then you would know that you may be the cause of All Might's death. And Izuku would look at him and say, it's not my fault how All Might dies, and there's no way you could look into the future and predict someone's death with a quirk. That's not how things work. Obviously, it might have shown you one possibility, but you can't pin those things on me. We can change fate, you know that? And maybe his fate wasn't changed for the best, but I'll make sure that his legacy always lives through, inside of me. Mirio would be like, boss, you could cut the tension in this room with a knife. I think we should get going. And Izuku and Mirio would go on a patrol as Izuku would badmouth Night-Eye, and Mirio would end up saying that Night-Eye's always been a very different character, if he has to put it lightly. But Night-Eye is just feeling different emotions right now. He'll probably cool off and warm up to him. For now, just ignore what happened there, and Izuku would say, how can I ignore it? He quite literally told me that I'm the reason All Might died, and you want me to just move past it like nothing happened? He quite literally told me that if it wasn't for me, my hero, my idol wouldn't be alive. I'm not just gonna get over that. In a huff and puff, Izuku would walk by an alleyway and a little girl would run by him. Izuku would grab her and ask her if she's okay, and she turns towards the alleyway only to see the villain Overhaul. Izuku, immediately noticing this, would look at her and see the look of terror in her eyes. And Izuku, when he sees a little kid scared, Izuku's heart would just like dun 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 dun. It just beats so loud until Izuku's eyes would glow green and his whole body would shift into a green monkey as he looks at the direction of All For One, and All For One would be like, what the? Or sorry, not All For One, but Overhaul would be like, what? As Izuku would blitz at him and straight like he destroys his subscription to life. Like, that's how bad Izuku destroys him. He cancels his subscription to living. And Izuku, after he does that, would look towards the direction of Overhaul and would see that Overhaul is nothing but straight mush. Like, Izuku would have straight, like, he was angry on this day, bro, and he would have straight punched Overhaul straight into a wall before Overhaul could have done anything. And following that, Izuku jumps up into the air, like meters in the air, and then slams down his fist on Overhaul's chest, like stomach and everything, just splattering his body everywhere. And Eri was looking away meanwhile that was happening because Mirio was making sure of that. But after that, Izuku would turn towards Mirio and say, "You deserve that." As he transforms into his normal state and said, "I smelled that little girl's blood on him. He's been torturing her. He needed to die." And Mirio would say that they're not to decide, that they're not the judge, jury, and executioner. But Izuku would say, "Oh, I will be." As from here, they take Eri back and the sports festival event would finally happen. Eventually, though, a couple more years would finally pass by, and Izuku would finally find himself to be the #1 hero that he always wanted to be. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where What If Deku Had Beast Boy's Powers is going to be ending. If you guys enjoyed this video, then definitely be sure to slap a like on the movie version of this and have yourselves an amazing, amazing day. Also comment down below what your favorite part of the video was, and check out my brand new channel, which isn't really that brand new, but I am going to be starting to post content on there, Spanish what ifs. If you guys are interested, check the link in the description. And also go check out my TikTok. That said, always remember this, ladies and gentlemen, God loves you. Anyways, peace.